Okay. Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again for Critical Issues Confronting China. I'm Dinda Elliott. I'm the Executive Director of the Fairbanks Center, and really delighted about our program today about young people in China. So, from the Red Guards of the Cultural Revolution to the May 4th movement of 1919 to the 1989 student movement to the recent white paper protests, young people in China have played an outsized role in China's political story. But today's youth are growing up in a China that is far more pluralistic and individualistic than ever before. And with a rising China, what they want, what young people in China today want, how their values are shifting, and how they behave will literally change the world. And so I'm absolutely thrilled today to have Zach Dychtwald with us. He's the author of the critically acclaimed Young China, which if you haven't read it, you should all run out and buy this book. It's really wonderful. Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World. And he's also the founder of market insights firm Young China Group. Zach has spent a decade in China, hanging out inside, literally inside Young China. And he speaks the best Mandarin of any Lao-Wai that I know. And at a time of rising misperceptions, he's an extremely effective and valuable cultural interpreter. So we're very grateful to have you today, Zach. The beauty of Zach's work is that it's so totally people-focused. But at the same time, from his microcosmic study of young people, he's able to draw some big and important conclusions about what it all means for the economics and politics of China. So we're going to kind of shake things up a little bit today. And Zach is going to speak for, say, 25 minutes or so. And then after that, we've got a group of young Harvard students who are literally young China, who are going to be joining us in conversation. So I'll introduce them now, and then they'll come up and join after Zach is finished. So we've got Lucy He, you can wave. Lucy He is a Harvard College senior from Guangzhou, who's studying computer science, math, and economics. We have Zijian Ma, who is a Harvard College junior from Tianjin, who's studying chemical and physical biology and computer science. You can tell these guys are all very, very smart. We've got Takara Kang, a graduate student from Beijing, studying learning design, innovation, and technology at the Harvard School of Education. And we have Yuhao Wang, who's a second-year graduate student from Beijing in the Regional Studies East Asia program, who's researching China's political economy. We've got a huge number of people who are online today as well, so we're really happy to have the online viewers. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Zach.
Hi. First, it's an incredible pleasure and honor to be here. I mean that quite sincerely. I'm really humbled to be here, getting to share these ideas with all of you. And as Dinda mentioned before, today's session is going to be a little bit different. We are going to be asking all of you to be a little bit more involved than the normal stand and deliver. And I want to start that right now. So first, how many people here self-identify as a Chinese youth? The question today is, what do Chinese youth want, right? How many Chinese youth do we have here? Please raise your hand if this is something you identify with. That's great. So it looks like about a third of the crowd here for the people who are watching online. And the question is, what do Chinese youth want? How many people here have a pen with them or some writing apparatus? That's great. If you don't, you have a phone. If not, you have this great remembering apparatus upstairs. Answer the question. Take 30 seconds and write down in your own words the first thing that comes to mind when I ask the question, what do Chinese youth want? I'm going to be quiet. $15 seconds. It's okay to cheat. Feel free to look at your partner's piece of paper or their notes. This is the only test where you'll be allowed to do that here, to my knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to do something that I never really do at the beginning of a talk, which is answer the question first and directly. So what do Chinese youth want? My answer, and I would say it's something that changes month to month, year to year, sometimes even moment to moment, depending on the news cycle. But my answer today is freedom and opportunity. But it's not necessarily the freedom and types of opportunities that we might initially think. And so the way that today's talk is going to go, I have my handy notes here, this is the entire speech, is I want to offer you, instead of just a concrete answer, the framework that I use and I've developed over the years to help understand the evolving answer to this question, what do Chinese youth want? And also understand the impact that that answer is going to have on all of our lives. It's a 5-part framework that hopefully you can take away with you today and apply in the future. And so with that, we're going to launch right in. The first point that I think about often is impact. We are in an academic setting today, and there are lots of generations around the world who offer a really interesting academic set of considerations and questions. I would argue that this young generation in China is much more than that because of the scale of the impact they will have on the world, not just an academic question, one that will impact each and every one of your lives individually. And to help paint that picture a little bit, I want to go back to 1990, the very first year that the post-90s generation in China, sort of the millennial equivalent, was born. In 1990, China represented 1% of the global GDP, 1%. Fast forward to 2003, that was the last pandemic, that was SARS, and China represented 4% of the global GDP. Fast forward to 2020, and China represents 19% of the global GDP. That's in a lifetime. If you go back to the year 2000, China had 2% of the global Fortune 500. Now they have 27%, which is 147 out of 500. The United States has 144 of those countries. If you look back to trade in the year 2000, the 75% of the world's countries, when you ask them, are you doing more trade with the US or China? 75% said US, 25% said China. You fast forward to 2020, those numbers have completely inverted. 75% of the world's countries are doing more trade with China than the United States. But what's interesting about this generation is if you actually go sector by sector, this particular generation, young people, not just all of China writ large, has a disproportionate impact on the economy. 46% of all of the world's electric vehicles are on the road in China, 46%. And Wuling Xiaoke, which is a wonderful electric vehicle company in China, reports that over 75% of their buyers are the post-90 generation. If you look at travel, China was the largest outbound travel economy in the world, and it wasn't even really close before COVID. 2/3 of all passport holders in the country are under the age of 40, 2/3. Luxury. One of the answers for what do Chinese youth want is bags. It's not the only answer, but it's one of them. China is meant to represent 3/4 of all of the world's luxury growth between 2020 and 2025. That number is likely to be pushed back to 2027, but 3/4 of all growth, comprising 40% of the entire luxury market, that's an impressive number. 79% of all luxury purchasing is done by the under 40 population in China. And so you have a dynamic in China that's a little bit different. In the United States, most of the wealth is aggregated at the top of the demographic pyramid, right? And so you have millennials and Gen Z who are making trends, but ultimately you have boomers who are moving markets in the US. In China, because of the way that wealth is distributed throughout the demographic pyramid, and we'll get to that a little bit later, you have young people not only making trends, they're also moving markets. And so what's the point? Is the point that, we should care about what bags people in China want to buy? That is not the point. I actually personally really do not care about that. The point is that the answer to this question, what do Chinese youth want, has real and immediate as well as lasting impacts. And I want to take a pause here. Often when I give some of these stats in the United States, people think, oh no, China is surpassing the United States. That's not the point either. And in many ways, that's not the case. But what is clear when you start to look at some of these numbers is that both China and the United States are surpassing everyone else, are in a league of their own. Second, so we understand that this generation has a lot of impact, a lot of clout, economic, political, with that comes some cultural. I want to talk about what is probably the most defining characteristic of this young generation when you compare them to other young generations around the world, and that is speed. When we think about how China has evolved over the last few years, there's a statistic that everyone really loves, which is that between 2011 and 2014, China poured more concrete than the United States did in the entire 20th century, which is an incredible statistic. And people often will show that picture of Shanghai. Shanghai in 1990, which looks like it could have been taken in the 1800s, and Shanghai in 2020, which looks like it could have been taken from a Jetsons cartoon. What incredible change in an incredibly short period of time. What people don't consider is how living through that amount of change impact the way that you see the world. We're all familiar with the concept of China speed. People don't think about the psychology of China speed. I actually wanted to quantify this. So this is, it changes a lot in other places. It changes a lot in China. That's fine. It's actually really not the same when you're comparing the amount of change. And so I created something called the Lived Change Index. How much change somebody has experienced in their lifetime. It's based on per capita GDP, how much that's increased since they were born. Not a perfect metric. Obviously, it doesn't take into account the Gini coefficient, wealth disparities, et cetera. But it's pretty good when you're comparing globally one cohort compared with another. Since 1990, I, as an American, I grew up in Northern California, have watched a per capita GDP increase 2.5 times in my lifetime. And I want you to imagine that in really concrete terms. So maybe the type of education that my parents could afford for me, 2.5 times better. Maybe the trips we could take as a family, 2.5 times longer. The hedges of people's yards, 2.5 times higher. However you want to imagine it, please imagine it in really concrete terms. The quality of life changing to 2.5x. My friends in China, born that exact same year, have watched their per capita GDP, their quality of life, increase 33 times in their lifetime. 2.5x in the United States, 33 in China, 1990 to today. Maybe it's just a developing country thing, right? What about India, the other demographic giant of Asia, actually larger than China now? It's the only place on earth with a larger youth demographic as well. 1990 to today, how much change has that youth demographic lived through in their lifetime? China 33x, India is 5x. Brazil, when I first moved to China, everyone was talking about BRICS. And I remember there was a moment where I'm like, would have been kind of fun in Brazil as well. 1990 today, Brazil about 3.2x per capita GDP. Again, China 33. Germany, the leader of Europe, 1.9. In fact, when you look at the top 40 economies around the world, what you'll notice is that there isn't one other country that has had double-digit lived change index in their life. That their per capita GDP has increased more than 10x in their lifetime, with one major exception, which is China. And the point isn't, gosh, I wish I had invested in the real estate market, which is, also a point to make. The point is, living through that level of change impacts your expectations towards growth, impacts your expectations towards the job market, changes your perspectives towards your parents, alters the way that you expect to have opportunity come about, either from the market or from your government. It changes your expectations around everything. It also changes the speed at which stereotypes become outdated. One of the most difficult parts of the United States, watching China from the United States, is that we know how fast we've changed here, and we project that on just about everywhere else in the world. For many places that makes sense. Again, China is the outlier here. But because China changes so fast, stereotypes outdate themselves faster. And so also because of that, when you look at generation gaps, right? We think a lot about generation gaps here in the United States. Millennials, we're so different than boomers, who are these Gen Z folks, okay, boomer, there's a lot of noise about that. because of China's pace of change, China doesn't just have generation gaps, it has generation gulfs. In 1969, my dad was making the decision of whether or not to go to the Woodstock Music Festival. He's from New Jersey, New York. And Woodstock Music Festival was best known for three things: sex, love, and rock and roll. I'm not gonna sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm not gonna divulge which of those he was excited about. But you can know a lot about my dad just from that one decision, right? There's a lot of anthropological wrapping in the decision of whether or not to go to Woodstock. He probably had disposable income, right? He certainly had discretionary time to take the weekend off. He was rebelling against something, the war, or someone, his parents, right? You can know a lot about the generation just from that. If you think to 1969 in China, that was the middle of the Cultural Revolution. That generation was best known for eating bitter, right? Doing difficult things for long periods of time at the prospect of delayed gratification. Not delayed gratification, I'm gonna work hard for 6 months, my kid's gonna get a good report card, we're gonna take him to Disneyland. Delayed gratification, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, so the next generation could have a better life. When we talk about that generation from China, we typically talk about it like it's ancient history. Those are China's retirees today. And often they actually raise this younger generation because of that skip generation child rearing. So you have the older generation raising their grandchildren quite often. And so those generation gaps, or those generation goals, excuse me, how does that impact the way that this young generation sees their future? Point number 3, demography. So just to recap here, point number 1 is impacts, outsized impact. Point number 2 is speed, the psychology of China's speed. Point number 3 is demography. I sort of just hinted at this with the older generation and their impact on the younger generation. We always focus on generational divisions. I want to think a little bit about generational continuity. China had the world's largest baby boom in the world. We typically think of China's baby bust, with the one-child policy. But between 1950 and 1980, China's population increased by 440 million people. So a population increase larger than the size of the United States and Canada combined. On the back end of that, of course, you have the one-child policy, which is the world's largest baby bust. And so, whereas for many years, China's demographic pyramid was just that, a pyramid, in 1950, you had between 5 and 6 kids per family. And the average life expectancy was 40. And so people weren't retiring and looking to rely on their children. They'd often be dying quite young. Now, because of the incredible longevity revolution, the average life expectancy was 40 in 1950. Today, it's around 75, 76, depending on who you ask, which is an incredible longevity revolution. With it comes the issue of that inverted demographic pyramid, right? The 4-2-1 problem, 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. Now, I want to take a pause here to tell a quick story, because for me, this is something that was very real. I'm sure actually most of you know the idea of the little emperor syndrome. Have you heard that? It's a term that came out in the late 1980s by a sociologist, I think somewhere around Cambridge, but I'm not going to point any fingers, who decided that being at the bottom of that upside down pyramid would lead to children who were spoiled rotten, right, by all the excess of attention, resources, etc. Now, in 2013, I just graduated from Columbia and I moved to China. And about a year after I had graduated, one of the jobs I was doing on the weekend to help fund my travel, I was taking trains around the entire country, beginning to imagine what would later become this book. And but I was working at a training center for young, relatively well-to-do children who were learning English as well as coding. You heard that correctly. And so in my class, there were 6 5-year-olds. And what I knew about these 6 5-year-olds was that they were probably little emperors, right? And there was one kid in particular named Dychtwald. Dychtwald had well-coiffed hair. He had an argyle sweater and corduroy pants with those light-up sneakers. He was very cute. And I expected that as class would go on, that most of you kids would be spoiled rotten. That's what I was told. That's all I really knew. Class starts, and truthfully, they're just kids, right? They're curious, they're interested, they were extraordinarily well-mannered. They hadn't had tons of experience playing with other kids, so they were a little nervous at first, but nothing out of the norm. And it would have been a totally normal class were it not for the fact that at the back of the classroom, behind a glass partition, for those 6 5-year-olds, were 12 parents and 24 grandparents. watching every twist of a microscope, every tap of a keyboard. Can you imagine the pressure? Class ends, and I hear Jianguo in the corner start to cry. I look over, and he has 4 grandparents looking kind of confused around him. His father is staying behind him, patting his back. He's dressed the exact same as Jianguo. And his mother, who, I assumed had dressed both of them, truthfully, was leaning over Jianguo with pieces of paper. As I got closer, I could see microscope, amoeba, keyboard. These are the words that we had learned that day in class. And I asked her, what's going on? I hadn't assigned any homework. And she said to me that Dychtwald will have to take the college entrance exam in 13 years. We are trying to give him the edge. There's something really important to understand about that upside down pyramid, right? I get investors who call me and they try to figure out how is it that young people in China can afford so much, right? They have about 1/5 of the purchasing power of American young people. And the answer is in part because of that upside down pyramid. Intergenerational financial fluidity. You do have that downward movement of funds, resources, opportunity. The older generation couldn't dream of studying abroad at Harvard, traveling abroad. People weren't leaving the province, let alone the country. By the way, 1 in 3 of all students studying abroad in the United States right now are from China. 1 in 3, which is peculiar for a country that seems to be obsessed with the mental diet of its population to encourage the best, brightest, often wealthiest families to come and study abroad. Something to think about. So yes, that upside down pyramid does come with an enormous amount of opportunity that the older generation didn't have. It also comes with excruciating pressure. Demography drives what I think of as the project of childhood in China. And the project of childhood, each country has. What is a childhood for? In China, the level of competition to get ahead in the middle school market, the high school market, the college market, the graduate school market, the job market, the real estate market, the marriage market is unrelenting. In the United States, we focus a lot on US-China competition. In China, people are focused on China-China competition, day in and day out. And so, yes, this young generation does have tremendous opportunity. It's also the most pressured generation I've ever seen. The 4th point, and I'm going to make it quick. We have 2 more points here, and then we're going to invite the smart young stars on stage to get Alex Trebek by me. This will be great. The 4th point is about being adaptive. And let me think quickly about how to make this slightly faster than I was imagining making the point before. I had talked before about China speed, right? How the psychology of China speed. And there's a saying from Deng Xiaoping that gets sort of brutalized in the academic community, which is "摸着石头过." That means crossing the river by feeling the stones. And everyone takes this particular saying and bends it to their will and at whatever point they're trying to make about China, which is fair. And I will say that when we think about that particular saying, which is pretty beautiful, right? The visualization is that we're a country who's on one side of a bank, a lack of development, looking at the other, which is prosperity. In between us, we have the rushing river of time, history, the challenges that come with us. We're placing a foot in that river, expecting to be knocked over, right? Crossing the river by feeling the stones, expecting to have to adjust as we go. Because the saying was really saying, we don't know exactly what we're doing, but we're going to figure it out along the way. And yes, that attitude was really talking about the government and their strategy, but that attitude of the need to adapt has washed over the entire population. There's an example I used in a Harvard Business Review article of a man named Lao Yang, old Yang. Old Yang had his industry violently disrupted in 2005. Violently disrupted. Old Yang is a beggar in Beijing. And for years, he relied for sustenance on sitting outside of the subway station and holding out his cup, and people would drop change in his cup, and that's how he supported himself. He was proud of that. It was something that he was able to maintain for decades. The problem was in 2015, people in China stopped carrying money. That was the year that WeChat Pay and Alipay came out. And so what did he do? Well, rather than just capitulate, he adapted. He printed out a QR code and hung it around his neck. He bought the cheapest smartphone that he could. And now when people leave the subway, instead of taking change out of their pocket, they will take out their phone, scan his QR code, and donate that way. Patient. I think when we think of innovation, we often think of the sort of people in turtlenecks in Silicon Valley and in Beijing and Shenzhen, looking out into the distance, talking about the new ideas that are going to impact the world. What makes China really unique when we talk about innovation, but broader adaptation, is that not only are the ideas really good, and there's increasing innovation parity between China and the world, not surpassing, but parity. What makes China unique is any innovator knows that an innovation only has value if people actually use it. And so between 2015 and today, Apple Pay actually came out the exact same time as WeChat Pay and Alipay, late 2014. About 2 years ago, Apple celebrated that 27% of its American users were using Apple Pay once a month. So monthly active users, at least once a month. In China, you have penetration around 90% or more. In 2020, there was 551 times more money spent through mobile payment in China than in the United States, 551 times. And the point here isn't about mobile payment. The point is that there's a relationship with commerce, there's a relationship with money, there's a relationship with debt, with consumption that exists in China that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world yet. And so that attitude of adapt, in some cases has translated to adopt. That's just tech. But if you look at other social mores and values, education in 1999, there was only 1 million college graduates. This last year graduated 11 million. That's changed just as fast. Premarital sex. In 1989, only 17% of the population, according to a certain study, was engaging in premarital sex, which people expected was probably even too high at the time. Those numbers have fully inverted. Now it's 80 plus. Some people expect in Chinese cities it's as much as 90%. Values, attitudes, worldviews in China change faster than in other places in the world because the environment has changed faster than other places in the world. And the last point, pride. This is a tricky one. Over the years, this point has evolved, and especially over this last year, this point now has an asterisk next to it. Often when I make this point, I'll show a slide of young people waving a Chinese flag and looking happy. And I'll ask people what they think about that. If I'm speaking at a conference or a book club or whatever it is, many people, especially if they've had a drink or two, will say the word brainwash. This idea that young people who could be proud of where they're from, if that were the case, then they must be brainwashed. It's something that comes up quite consistently. And I usually tell a story, which is the very first time that one of my friends, who's from a city called Chengdu, small city of 1 million people outside of Chengdu, very first time that he saw the United States. He was born in 1990, like me. Very first time he saw the United States was when he was 6 years old. It was the Atlanta Olympics, 1996. And he remembers his uncle, everyone sort of gathering around the TV in his uncle's house because no one in their home had one. And watching on the screen, his mom tapped him during the opening ceremony and said, "Look, that's America, it's the most powerful country in the world," which was undeniably true. First time he ever saw the United States. And that year, the United States won 44 gold medals and China won 16. It was not bad for a country that had about $500 GDP per capita at the time. His name was Wen Tao. Wen Tao was 6. Fast forward to 2008, from 6 to 18 years old at the time, it's the Beijing Olympics. Does everyone remember where they were during the Beijing opening ceremony? Historians, some call it the largest level of coordination in a human performance in history. And that year, just 12 years after Atlanta, Wen Tao remembers watching the United States win 36 gold medals and China win 48. What's the value of a gold medal? Pretty much nothing. But what's the value of pride? Even in the last 10 years, the lived experience of this young generation has had them watch China become a sort of regional power, to being in a legitimate trade war with the United States. The trade war was fought 10 years ago. It wouldn't be a trade war. It would be a large company bullying a middle-sized country. That there's equivalence now is change. And it's something that has made them quite proud. Rather than seeing China as a macro idea, it's watching your village turn into a town, turn into a city in your lifetime. Watching your uncle be proud to wheel that TV into his home back in the early 90s, to now having a 2-car garage just 2 decades later. And in a normal talk, I would stop there and say thank you. But this last year has seen some changes. The pride point, we have to put an asterisk next to it now in a way that I did not feel was necessary a year ago. And it comes back to the first sentence I said, which is really at the start of the speech, which is the idea of freedom and opportunity, right? That's what young China wants. That's what Chinese youth want. Since the Shanghai lockdown, which were almost exactly a year ago, there has been a level of uncertainty towards the future that over time has compounded. If you started a company, you don't know if you're going to be open 2, 3, 4 weeks of the month. This is all until quite recently. If you're an employee, you don't know if you're going to be paid 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of the month. If you had been VC backed, that VC money has dried up. If you were looking for jobs in the big tech companies, they're now laying people off. And by the way, before they were treating employees like they were disposable. If you look back to the job market issues and there's issues of pressure, it helps to understand the issues of Meidren, involution, and lying flat, which are big buzzwords in our media today when we talk about young people. That project of childhood informs how people act as adults. And so as time passed since the lockdown, and obviously things have changed radically in the last 6 weeks, we are probably at the nadir of public perception towards the government, at least in the last 2 decades. Now, there's a major difference between protesting bad policy and bad government. But I will say this, especially because we are in the midst of the final moments of the National People's Congress. The bank of goodwill is being pressed right now in China in a way that I've never seen in the last 13 years of being in and around China, which isn't very long. But the freedom and opportunity that this young generation wants is still there. And I will say that freedom is not the freedom that we expect, which is freedom from an oppressive and restrictive government. That's what most of us imagine, particularly here in the United States. The freedom I heard over the course of a decade of interviews in China was freedom from an oppressive and restrictive set of expectation, that pressure to get ahead, that pressure to compete. And the freedom is the freedom of opportunity to get a job that you want, that is the expectations that you have, to live the life that you the way that you see fit. And up until quite recently, that was sort of a no-brainer for people. Their government and their system was delivering on that in a way that made them proud, in a way that most Americans didn't understand. That hasn't gone away, but is being challenged at this particular moment in time more than it has been in probably 2 decades. So to recap this framework that I hope you could walk away with. First is this idea of impact, outsized impact on the world from this young generation. Second is speed, the psychology of China's speed, how that changes your attitudes towards money, government, opportunity, family, etc. The third is demography, generation gaps, generation gulfs, how that impacts relationships between families, as well as relationships with authority. The fourth is adaptive and adoptive, how an attitude of adapt, and an ecosystem that directed that has translated to adopt, and not just in tech, but in all attitudes and values toward life. Perhaps not all, I'm going to qualify that, many. And fifth is pride. There is a wellspring in a life of informed pride, informed by the average person's life experience. It has been impacted by this last year, but it hasn't gone away. And now, the next year, the next 5 years really, it will be an opportunity for this young generation. See if the government, the system that they're within, can help deliver on that sense of opportunity, which for nearly a full year felt like that flame was being extinguished. Thank you. And so here's what we're going to do now. We are going to invite these 4 young stars onto the stage. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions. They are free to ask questions of me. You're all free to ask questions of me. You're all free to ask questions of them. We're going to start with 2 or 3 that I get to curate. This is part of the fun of having a microphone. And
Go ahead, guys. Go.
yeah, please. And I will say this is being live streamed. This is being posted afterwards. And as people who travel back and forth and go back and forth, if there are particularly contentious questions that we are unable to answer, we're just going to say that. And so be aware of that. That is something that we are all trying to work within for something that is as open door as this conversation. Please have a seat.
Do you want to speak here?
No, it's all you.
Okay, thank you.
I might sit over there. Is that all right?
Be one of the young people.
Of youth, so just a great part. This
Oh,
is
still young.
to relive that. So while we're starting up, can everyone just say your names one more time? Okay. So if everyone would please share their names one more time and quickly where you're from.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Yu Hao. I'm from Beijing and doing Chinese political economy now.
Hi there, my name is Tatara. I'm from Beijing as well. Yeah, I grew up in Beijing, but I lived in Australia, Sweden, the US, a lot of places. I'm studying education right now.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucy. I grew up in Guangzhou, China, and I'm currently a senior at the college studying computer science and math with secondary economics.
Hi everyone, I'm Carl. Feel free to call me Zijian. I'm born and raised in Tianjin, China, and this is my first time studying abroad. I'm currently a junior studying chemical and physical biology and CS with a secondary in sociology.
Excellent. And so remember the headline of this talk is what do Chinese youth want? And so I want to ask a question, and we're going to start with you, Al, and then go this way. The first question is, what do your parents want for you?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, I kept think about it, but I may start from a quite mundane answer. I think they want me to live a decent life. Well, you can argue what means decent, but basically earn have a good job in urban, maybe a white collar one, and live doing what I'm happy for. But also, like maybe personally, they want me to live closer to them, and finally, they want me to keep a distance from politics, which is very ironic because I study politics. So, yeah, basically that's the answer.
Follow you. Question or answer brief so we can get action from that.
Yeah, my answer is really easy because growing up, the first and the last question that my parents say to me before they send me back to school is that be happy. Like the only wish we have for you is to be happy, but who defines happy? I think this is a big problem that I think the happiness that they define is a life that is safe, stable. A good future for them is a future that is predictable, that is safe, stable, that is harmonious. Is that the word? Harmonious.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think growing up, the thing I hear the most is, oh, we really want you to be happy. But I also agree with Tara that sometimes when they say that, maybe they mean a slightly different things. Maybe they have a slightly different definition of happiness than you have. So I think that's one thing. And another thing is that they definitely want their kids to have like a track record of excellence and also stay ahead of the curve in terms of like technology innovation, in terms of like things to study and things people you talk to. I do feel like there's a lot of expectation to reach that. Yeah.
How do your parents define happiness?
I don't think they have like an explicit definition, but I do feel it is tied to achieving excellence in your domain and also being able to explore the world. For example, I'm very fortunate enough to be studying here. And I think for them, this is definitely like a notion of she is leading a happy life, like learning all these really interesting things and engaging with all these amazing people. I think this definitely ties into it.
Thank you.
Along the same line, I definitely feel the same way of all the previous students. And my parents often taught to me like to be happy. And I think it's really like contextualized and it's very dependent on where you are and where you're at right now. Especially like given we are already at Harvard, I think the definition of happiness already shifted a lot for our parents, and the criteria is different for people back in China, people here. But I think people like, at least my parents really want me to be happy, and they are not quite limiting on my career choices or my future plans. But just to speak on what does like happiness really entail, it's very different than what they say and what they do and what they actually embody, because I feel so relatable to the experience of like being raised in a lot of like 奥数班、英语班, and I feel a lot of people around me feel the same way, and that could be a slightly discrepancy in terms of like how you define happiness. It's like their happiness is contingent and dependent on your achievement sometime, and within a specific scope of freedom and choices, there's also a very strong standard of achievement and steadiness and working hard to achieve that happiness. So it's not unconditional, it's not free, like entirely free of like any conditions. Yeah.
And so what you were just referencing were the after school training and programs that you had to do as a child?
Yeah. For my generation, I think we normally started like going after school classes around grade 3. So when I was about 9 or 10, and we have classes 7 days a week, and I don't have any free time during the weekend back then.
I want to bring up a statistic, and you can tell me if this is going off questions here a little bit, but in China, the occurrence of myopia, nearsightedness, in college graduates is much different than the United States or Western Europe. In the United States, college graduates with myopia is about 40%. And myopia is really about what you do every day. There's some genetic attributes, but it's a composite of your daily activities. 40% in the United States, about 37 in the UK, I think 42 in Germany, but kind of hovering around there. In China, it's 90%. A composite of what you do every day, the amount of hours in books. I would go to Suzhou University, which is a middling university in China to study back in my first year. And I was studying on my own. And I would get there to try to outstudy people. I would get there at 6 a.m. when things would start. There would already be a line of people, and I'd be kind of looking for a spot. And I tried to stay there as long as I could. And I went to Columbia, which is a reasonable school. And I not once was able to outlast what were probably middling students in Chinese university. They were exceptional to me, but the level of rigor and hard work there is different, going back to this project of childhood. So the second question here is, how is what your parents want for you different from what you want for yourself?
Yeah, I would say in my case, like people talk about like when you're a teenager, when you're a teenager, you may have explicit confrontation with your parents. Not that much in my case, because in some way, yeah, I do want to live a decent life. I want to enjoy what I'm doing, and I want to do something valuable. But maybe the main difference here is that I think some part of myself, I still care about, the wider society. It might be sounds too large, but I can't help like only think about, okay, as long as I live a good life, it's okay. I still think about what about my neighbors, my, people who are not in the same situation with me. And also maybe like some people don't even realize like they're not living a happy life. What about them? So at some point that really drives me more into engaging into some like activity rather than like only care about yourself. Yeah.
I really like this point. I resonate with it. And I'll just add on a little bit on Yuhao's statement. I think the reason that our parents are like only care about themselves or ourselves is that just as what Zach said, they grow up in the Cultural Revolution era and they really care about they have the fear of losing something they have and they really care about what they have right now and they want to keep it. But what we have is we know that we are like we have enough food, we have enough, things for living. So we're thinking about people else than us. And also for myself, just as I said, my parents really care about harmony and stability. And I think this is a big difference from what they want for me and what I want for myself. Well, they want harmony, relational harmony of my life. What I want is self-worth. If something will offends my self-worth, I would not mind having a conflict with some people or the environment. I want to fight for myself, but what they want is just don't hurt yourself or like don't hurt what you already have. And this is a big difference I think we have.
Yeah, I really like the previous answers. Just to build on those a little bit, I think for me, like a difference might come from kind of relates to what I was saying earlier, how people define happiness might be slightly different and how people define excellence might also be slightly different. So, for example, growing up, because I grew up entirely in a Chinese education system, so there's this Zhongkao, Gaokao, which is like which is like high school and college entrance exams. So with these, there are certain criteria. For example, you have to hit a certain score so that you can apply for certain colleges that are like renowned in China. Whereas once you come to the States, a lot of these lines are kind of blurry. How do you define excellence? Everyone here are doing completely different things. There isn't like a set of scores that can say, okay, you're doing a great job. So I think maybe right now, sometimes my parents' expectations are still conditioned on these are the things that are perceived by the people around me to be prestigious, to be good. Whereas for me, I sort of want to take the space to explore more what I think is both, well, like what Yuhao was saying, both I will live a decent life, but I can create a larger social impact, but that might not be the job that people think, oh, it's right now getting you the most money or like being the most prestigious in New York or something like that. So I think that might be something.
Do you think your parents would be understanding of that, taking a potential pay cut to do something that would be more fulfilling to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been in conversation with them about it, and I feel like I think gradually they understand it more, but at the beginning, I think they were still thinking, oh, you have come this far. Like, I mean, you went to Harvard, you have this like good track record, you should do something that people think is good and like get you well paid, and you have a decent life.
I want to ask one more question. I, of course, I'm not.
No,
prepared,
yeah.
And in the rest of your answers, feel free to weave this in. How much is what the community around your parents, aunts and uncles, distant relatives, how much and the want to be proud of you in front of them impacts what your parents want for you, if at all?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I would say that sort of pride has been there since I was a child, and like Zijian was mentioning about the Aushuban, the after school trainings, I think part of it is also like, oh, you can get like gold medal and silver medals in those competitions, and then that would give you an edge into a better middle school, better high school. But I guess they definitely had in mind this like, oh, my child is like leading a very nice education trajectory and like she will go places. I think it is definitely in the back of their mind, and I think that is impacted by the people.
Cool. I think I can answer these two questions collectively. First is like definitely for sure that people around us, around our family, will have some impact on my trajectory of life or with the expectation of my family. But the thing is, like, ever since we have been attached the hierarchy or assessment system of like Chinese high school, of Chinese university, the pride already like built into the system. Like once you achieve like a higher echelon in that social ladder, not just social ladder, but academic ladder, you will automatically get those prides from people around you. Which is kind of sad, but also very true in China society. And the second point is that what parents expect from me differ from what I expect from myself. I think similarly, I really agree with what Lucy was saying. It's like self-realization is definitely one major part of my personal goal and career goals. But the thing is, like, my parents also kind of like have a similar way of what I think. It's like once you can live a decent life, can sustain yourself, you are free to do whatever you want. And upon that standard, a universal matrix will be how many people can help in your life, how many social impact you can achieve in your career. So I think that's also where my parents and I really agree on. Is like after holding yourself accountable, sustainable for what you're doing, and you're living a decent life, you're free to do whatever you want. But just to balance by like offering a counter argument, this conversation is very contextualized. We are already at Harvard. It's already very survivor biased, a very confirmation bias of like where we are right now. And for people in China and in other schools might feel very differently than what we are feeling right now.
It's an excellent point.
Yeah.
It really is an excellent point. In a lot of ways, you are at the apex of this competitive system. How have your views on, and by the way, I'm going to open it up momentarily so everyone get your tough questions ready. How have your views on America and China changed or evolved since coming to Harvard? And I'm not going to call on you anymore. Just whoever has an answer, speak out.
I feel like I'm living through the change, especially the change of eras, especially it's about US-China relationship or more about
US, or how have your views of the US and or China changed since coming to Harvard? That could include US-China relations, but it could just include your perception of the United States since living here, so immersed, or even your perception of your home.
Yeah. I think my answer might be very different from a lot of other people, because for me, my first exposure to the United States after COVID, and I don't know how much that factored into my assessment process. But I definitely feel after coming to Harvard, I feel like the vast difference in terms of educational systems. I feel a lot of more freedoms in terms of what I want to do as compared to like Chinese high school system, because I was also in the Gaokao system through my entire educational career. But also my opinion on China also changed quite differently, because right now, thinking more of like an individual who are responsible for the people around you, the community you belong to, there are more of social responsibility factor into my perception of different countries. Here I can contribute to student club, I can contribute to like student life, I can contribute to the people around me by fostering like a harmonious community. But back in China, I feel the participation process could be very different, and that really changed how I perceive China and perceive US in terms of like civil involvement, in terms of like civil rights, in terms of student rights, in terms of like political voices, all could be factored into that process. So I definitely think by being exposed to everything here in the States changed a lot of my views on how I view things in China.
Yeah, I think one point for me is that maybe it's not really because I come to Harvard or whatever. It's more about because I left China, and I lose the daily engagement with real people. It's more about like online. I feel more stronger about the like Chinese internet or in Chinese mind. They really cares about US. So when you talk about anything, like they use US as a reference, especially when you talk about social illness, they say, what about US? Like if you are saying, oh, I want some change, I don't think it's good. They think about, oh, you are saying US is better. So, but that's totally different in US. Like, of course, yeah, Fairbanks Center care about China. We have a community care about China. But just in people's daily, ordinary life, China is not such a big deal. I think like they are more focused on their own life, and maybe Massachusetts, what happened in Boston, what happened in this neighborhood, whatever. So I start to feel more worried about it. So I feel like so behind the pride of China, there is certain anxious. There is like maybe some Chinese netizens start to feel like, okay, we are in direct confrontation with the US now, and US really want to press us down. But but I think it's biased somehow. Yeah.
Did you say
Anxious anxiety there. Yeah.
So the book title talks about the restless generation.
Right. Yeah.
Not the optimistic generation or the go-go generation or in a lot of ways, it's the identity generation. You have the two tectonic plates of tradition and modernity, what your parents might think it means to be happy or fulfilled or Chinese even, and what you're experiencing out in the world. Those tectonic plates often grinding against each other. The process of forming a modern identity is really happening in real time in China, especially since the older generation is really moving from subsistence up. And identity formation is a lot of things. Anxiety producing, negotiating these values with your parents, with your community, with yourself. All very anxiety.
Well, I do like the previous answers, but mine is a bit more personal and also from a cultural perspective. I think the biggest culture shock I got when I got in Harvard was that I found out that everything in the university is negotiable, which is totally different from what I experienced in China. I remember there was a time where in one class, there were like two long paper being really close to each other. Like the first reaction of mine was, oh my God, this is too much. I need to stay in the library for the whole day. And then my American classmates just sent an email to the professor and saying, this is ridiculous. You should cancel this. And the paper was canceled. The last paper was canceled. I was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
the world works like this.
Do you think that's good or bad? Or not?
I just think we have different cultures. I mean, for US people are like really used to being, fight for their freedom, fight for their rights. And in China, I think the face culture is really a big thing. All we want is to keep everything harmonious. And also, like the most thing Chinese people care about is not to have conflicts, especially with people who are like higher in the hierarchy. And this is it's just a difference. I wouldn't think this is something bad or good, I guess.
Yeah, if I may second on this a little bit, this total culture shocked me. So I think in 2021, when the first fall semester I come here, it was in about the mid-autumn day. So in mid-September, I want to have a small maybe not small, maybe a large gathering with some Chinese friends here. And I want to use a bench or public camp, whatever in the campus. And I send a letter to my program administrator, ask where should I ask for permission, and they just said, okay, so it's public, so as long as you can take it, it's yours. And that's really a small culture shock for me, because I think the default setting in my previous life in China is that most things you need permission or you need to ask for, like I can do this, and then like you do it. But however, I feel here, in most cases, the default setting is more about like you can do whatever you want as long as you don't cross the line. So that sense of freedom is really different. I think, particularly in the age of pandemic, when even like a college student get in or out of campus need to be permitted. That's really a strong feeling here.
Yeah, and I guess experience also not really related to coming to Harvard, but just like the US education system. It's just how people are so open to trying new things and doing all sorts of things besides studying, whereas maybe partly because of the Gaokao education system, definitely study is on the top of people's minds. But then again, it is conditioned on, because there are so many students in China and limited like opportunities and such. So you have to really battle for these good resources. Whereas here, maybe because of, for example, even here, like the faculty students ratio is like way different compared to like Peking University or Tsinghua University. So it's not really apple to apple comparison, but I do feel like when I come here, this is probably like the biggest change I feel. And I think also spending more time in this environment, I also think back to my own country. Like maybe before coming here, I wasn't really thinking about how might I one day like bridge some of these institutional differences, how might I bring some of these perspectives back to the Chinese education system and have people of my age right now, they might also know that, oh, these are some other things you can do besides studying. But I know like we have to find a way to connect these to how do we still offer the same amount of opportunities as people who are like spending that much time studying to get good grades. So I know there's like a lot of complications, but that became a thing I thought more about after spending more time in this environment.
Thank you. I want to open it up for questions, and with the last couple of minutes, I'm reserving some time for a rapid fire round, which is I'm going to say a word and you're going to say the first thing that comes to mind. So prepare yourselves. But first, let's open it up to questions. Any questions for either the panelists or myself?
Okay, Eva, associated with Asia Center. First question will be, I was traveling and stay in Beijing mostly, like in China from 2009 to 2019, so 11 years in China. And I have heard of about like a Haigui, the frustration from the people who study out abroad and then, you know, went to China, the frustration they meet. So, you know, maybe you've heard of it, you know, anticipated with that, or have you heard about that? The secondly, you know, I want to kind of touch the politics, you know, maybe it's a sensitive, you don't have to answer, but I kind of want to throw something for you to, you know, reflect. You know, China and Taiwan keep an emphasis on these, you know, same language and same culture or same ethnicity. But if we look at the politics in Taiwan, the first one, if you look from the president or the mayor right now, Taiwan's mayor, most of them have been studying abroad. But you know, international education. So they went back and they can transform the politics there. And I never heard about you mentioned like your family ask you say, okay, let's participate in the politics. I think this is the kind of a dilemma. If the people already have a international okay, sorry, I want to make it. So I when we talk about freedom, I just want you to think of like a creativity. Creative thinking, how you can change this kind of a political glass ceiling. Thank you. Sorry.
So I'm going to focus the question on the Haigui portion just for brevity. And so the Haigui are people who studied abroad in Hong. What's interesting in 2019, as more and more people were actually electing to go back to China instead of staying, pretty consistent trend. The parallel trend was that the value of a foreign education was perceived to be going down. Part of that was just the number of people who were studying abroad every year was no longer as rare as it was. And to your point, if you look to like the second generation of Chinese entrepreneurs and CEOs, pretty much all of them studied abroad. It's consistent. And so there's this interesting dichotomy of the value of foreign education isn't quite what it was because scarcity drives value and that's gone down. But on the other hand, it's still very much a part of not just the government strategy, but individuals' lives, encouraging people to study abroad and then encouraging them to come back. I don't know if any of you have thoughts on the value of a foreign education and how that's evolved.
Yeah, the utility definitely goes down if you are only thinking about monetary value, definitely. But so now the justification is about like whether you or not you want to explore more like an alternative way of living rather than just go to school, go back, go to work, whatever.
the value for your life has not been diminished. You could argue. We have another question. Two over here.
Liu Xiao, I'm a retired professor of economics. I have a question which is a touch upon lightly. All four of you are very young, and also the question is, what do you expect or your parents expect? I'd like to know, your answer is always focus on yourself. You touched upon you're thinking actually beyond yourself. To what extent for this younger generation you think about common good? You actually want to contribute something really meaningful beyond your own success and achievement.
I think Oliver touched upon this a little bit, but we all, I think, have to some extent like a broader vision beyond our personal development, but rather the contribution commitment back to the society. But yeah, talking about the broader Chinese university student level, I think it's quite different because the job market is not doing well, and probably have heard the data that the unemployment rate for the younger generation after graduation is about 20% by official data, which might be more than 30%, and not including the people who are doing their own startups. That means a lot of people are not financially supported, and their first priority was to find a job and get stabilized and settle down. And I think that may be different for Haikui or for people here in the United States, but in China, people do not have the opportunity or even I don't want to use the word capital, but they don't have the opportunity to explore other things beyond themselves. I feel that's a very brutal truth, but also something people find really hard to grapple with on an individual level.
Yeah, I really agree with what Kyle was saying. I think all of us, we are trying to like use what we're learning here and then trying to apply it to the greater world. Like, for example, I study CS, and I'm pretty sure like down the road, I want to do AI for social good stuff. So that's kind of how I'm positioning myself in terms of my career development and how it relates to the broader world. But I do feel like people in China, especially when it's such an intense competition environment, I think a lot of my friends, they must have this question in their mind, and after everything that's happened in the past years, they definitely have different thoughts on what they want to contribute. But I think it is a truth that they have to first establish themselves well financially. And I think that's just an inarguably true thing to do.
We have 2 minutes left, and I know that we have other questions. If it's okay, I'd like to do a lightning round, and then we're all going to be around for a little bit afterwards. I'm sure some of you have to run out to class. So I apologize, but I think this will be worthwhile. And so the rules of the lightning round are basically, you're gonna have to go very fast. So you're gonna be going in between mics. I don't want you to think that much. I'm gonna say about 10 different words, and you say the first thing that comes to mind. The way we're gonna do this is we're gonna go this way the whole time. So there's no ambiguity about it, okay? So you gotta have first and you politically well ready. Okay, softball, travel.
Restricted.
A lot of people want to.
Money.
Exciting.
School.
Intense.
Competitive.
Competitive.
I also want to say competitive, but
Single child.
Caring.
Conflict.
I would say core family. So it's more about
You're breaking the rules. Work. Soon.
Lots of considerations.
Money.
yeah. I also want to say salary.
Money.
Easy money.
Important.
Hard money.
Hard to make.
Love.
What is it?
Love.
Dating culture.
Evolving.
Intimacy.
Marriage.
Marriage.
The next one is marriage. Marriage system is breaking down.
A vastly changing system.
Family.
My expectation.
War.
Not too far away from daily life.
Peace.
Conflicts.
Probably.
Future.
Blurry for any individual.
Opportunities.
Excitement.
Uncertainty.
I want to thank you all so much for taking part. This was really special, and thank you all for coming. I think the one sort of final thought to remember here is these relationships are evolving, and the answer to this question is fast changing. What is clear, and this is something I think about daily, is that a people first perspective and a people first approach to any global macro relationship, especially one as consequential, economically, politically, cultural as this one, is worth our time and attention. So thank you very much.